Three Lives, Three Worlds. The Pillow Book. Upper volume. Original work by Tangki Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, Rock Harlequin, Joanna Kuang. Second half Fanyan Valley. Chapter 7. Bundled in a thick cloak, Fengju sat next to a window inside the western wing and yawned by the fire as she transcribed for the 7th time a copy of the Dari Psalm as a punishment given by her teacher. In her childhood she had been mischievous and had often been punished by her teachers in Qingkai. Since her classmates' parents mostly worked for her family, however, they usually volunteered to take her punishments for her. She had been in school for so long but she'd never had to lift a finger carrying out punishments. How things had changed. She was no longer young at the age of 30,000. And being a queen, it was therefore lamentable that she was now bending her back over school discipline in the Bianiao's lecture hall. From this event Fengju drew two conclusions. 1. A dragon cannot fight against a local snake. Her ancestors had not deceived her. 2. Even a boar of a sidekick can survive 10 wolves. Again, her ancestors had not deceived her. The local snake in question was of course the Bianiao's stern schoolteacher, and her hog of a sidekick could only be Yan Chaiwu. How did things end up this way? Fengju had racked her brains for 6 months and could only scratch it up to unavoidable fate. Half a year ago, she and warrior Xiao Yan haplessly fell onto a protruded cliff in Fanyan Valley. After spending a short moment reminiscing about the past, the two of them again haplessly fell from the cliff down to the bottom. As ill luck would have it, they landed right on top of an adjoining winged bird's Bianiao's second prince whose clan dwelt deep under these cliffs. Their hard times thus began. This second prince was surnamed Xiangli, called Meng. His full name was hence Xiangli Meng, although he was usually referred to as Young Master Meng. This particular clan had an ancient rule which prohibited unmarried males from leaving the valley on their own. But young Master Meng had always yearned for the glittering world outside. He'd secretly intended on leaving for a long time and had picked a good day to run away from home. Unexpectedly, Fengju fell from the sky and knocked him unconscious the moment he left the city's gates. Yan Chaiwu was squished between Fengju and young Master Meng. Being dizzy himself, by the time he regained awareness, the two of them had already been tied up and led to the Bianiao royal palace. On the royal throne was the Bird Queen, mother to young Master Meng. There were many subjects Fengju didn't care to study, but history was her favorite. She knew the Bianiaos and Qingkai had close ties. She winked at Xiao Yan, signaling that they mustn't let slip her identity. Xiao Yan's brain was denser than steel. He looked at her for the longest time and still couldn't figure out the meaning in her eyes. Lucky for her, he never knew she was Qingkai's queen to begin with. Knocking the second prince unconscious could be a big deal, or it could be a small one. If he never woke up again, it'd be a big deal. If he woke up in time, and there was someone to clear things up, it'd be a small one. Luckily, young Master Meng woke up in time and promptly soothed his mother's fury. Previously she had ordered for the two of them to be executed. Halfway to the death dungeon, the sentence changed into the water prison, but the water prison's gates hadn't lifted when another decree came out which said they weren't to be imprisoned at all. They were immediately brought back to the Grand Hall, now with respect and courtesy. Fengju and Yan Chaiwu were escorted back to the royal court where they were questioned previously. Someone had apparently made haste to the Grand Hall a moment ago and spoke up on behalf of them. After an investigation was conducted, it was confirmed that the two of them were in fact the young prince and princess from the Owl clan across the river. Admiration for their neighbor's academy led them here to study. They accidentally fell on top of the prince, and everything thereafter was a misunderstanding. In Fengju's mind, this story was the real misunderstanding. But since the queen believed it, who was to say they should concede their good providence? This time in the Grand Hall the queen's attitude had changed considerably. She decreed that the two were now guests of the clan, and being so studious, shall be accepted into the Royal Academy to satisfy their eagerness to learn and also to allow the two clans' youths mingle. Standing inside the Biennial Royal Court, Fengju thought to herself that despite hating to stick her face into books all day, she had attended school for thousands of years. She had only needed to put on a docile appearance, and attending school again should not be difficult. But warrior Xiao Yan was a free spirit who did not like constraints. He'd probably not be able to stomach the strict school rules. He might even prefer the water prison over books and pens. For that reason Fengju suddenly felt nervous. What if Yan Chaiwo suddenly said one wrong word and sent the both of them into danger? With his intelligence, she thought he could very well do so. But surprisingly, his performance was very good today. After stepping into the Grand Hall, he spaced out for a while, the anxiousness in his eyes gradually disappeared, and the usually hot-tempered man stood with his head slightly bowed as if he was obediently accepting the queen's arrangements. Luckily, he only stood there in silence. With his handsome and humble outer appearance, they couldn't tell that he was the leader of the demon clan. At this time Fengju felt a bit strange. She followed Xiao Yan's gaze as it went past the courtiers standing on two sides and stopped at a young woman in white garments and face veil. Because Xiao Yan was acting oddly, Fengju gave her a careful observation. However, she couldn't figure out what was different between her and the other white-robed girls, and eventually put it out of her mind. That night the pair of them rested in the Biennial's Royal Academy. During the first few days, Fengju still had thoughts of escaping this valley. But after a little exploring, she discovered there was indeed no way out. There might have been a solution if she could use magic, but the strange thing about this valley was that one could only use magic within the Imperial City boundaries. Not even the most powerful magic worked once they stepped away from the city. At first she thought of transporting from within the city. The magic would be used while inside to transport them to the valley's entrance. The result, she and Xiao Yan moved from the west side of the city to the east side, landed into a widow's home while she was bathing, and got chased out with a broomstick by her blind mother-in-law. Afraid she would be stuck here indefinitely, for half a month Fengju's anxiety would increase day by day. She thought of the culprit who caused her to be trapped under here Donghua Daijun on the 13th celestial heaven. She wanted to keep her distance from him, but among all life forms outside this valley, Donghua was the only one who knew she had fallen down here. Therefore, she waited and waited for him to come save her. Of course she knew she had offended him just before falling into this valley. It'd be impossible to expect his arrival only after 3 or 4 days. She gave him some time to cool down. If he came after 1 month and took her home, then she'd generously waive his misdeed for bringing her to Mount Fuyu and its consequential danger. Despite rumors which claimed Fanyan Valley only opened up every jiazi, she believed that if Donghua wanted to save her, he would certainly find a way. But a month, 2 months, then 3 months passed by, and Dong Hua was still nowhere to be seen. Fanyin Valley was utterly depressing at night. Fengju rolled herself in a blanket and occasionally thought to herself how petty Dong Hua had been. They were fellow fairies, and he could have tried to care a bit more about his junior. But as she turned in bed, she came to think differently. Such thing was actually hard to say. When she was still a baby fox, she understood Dong Hua well. He had always been cold toward everyone and everything. Jihan was perhaps the only exception in this world. Normally she tried her best to keep her calm demeanor. But as it turned out, she had yet to reach the age of tranquil reflection. Only the fact that Dong Hua hadn't come to her rescue saddened her for days. When at last her mood lifted, she thought realistically and willed herself to wait another jiazi for Fanyangu to open again. If she were to think again, this place wasn't so bad. Compared to being a sweeping maid at Taichan Palace, it was tenfold better. Her family would probably look for her, but they shouldn't be too worried knowing she'd never get herself in significant dangers. She cheered up after these thoughts. At this point in time, half a year had swiftly passed by. On a lightly snowed day under soft sunlight, Fengju had written 10 copies of scriptures. She carefully held the parchment by its corners and blew on it so the ink could dry. Then she folded it up and planned on handing it to her teacher tomorrow. Fanyin Valley's academy held a tournament every 10 years to test its students. The victor's prize was that year's saha fruit which grew on the tree next to the Jiayu Spring. Jiayu Spring was a holy stream in Fanyin Valley. It started at the inner palace and on its banks stood a saha tree. This tree flowered every 10 years, bore fruit every 10 years thereafter, and only one fruit each cycle at that. The fruit differed each time and contained different magical uses contingent on that year's harvest. According to legend, the saha was one of 5 magical trees on the celestial heavens. The other 4 were Griefless, Jamhul, Bodhi and Longhua. The Buddha's lips are of the same color as the saha's crimson shade. Such was written in the ancient scripts. But 10,000 years ago, for some reason, all the saha trees on Zhukongtian ceased to bear fruit. Today in the lower realm, there was only one tree left next to Jiayu Spring at Fanyin Valley which still bore fruits. It became even more precious for this reason. Moreover, rumors had it that this year's saha fruit still held a miraculous power. For mortals, it could revive the dead; for immortals it could increase one's fairy essence; for a female her beauty and youth would be enhanced to be more sparkling than the peaches grown from the Dowager Queen's garden on Zhukongtian. Because this fruit's potency was so extraordinary, there wasn't one student who didn't vie for it. The competition hadn't started but excitement had already spread everywhere. Such was the power the mustached teacher received from the Bianiao Queen. Because the number of competitors were twice as many as the year before, there wasn't a single school that could accommodate all of them. The academy informed the Queen and she decided this teacher would streamline the process by filtering the applicants pre-competition. Thus under royal edict, the mustached teacher's one word could decide who would compete versus who would not. His power in the academy was now the greatest, bar none. Fengju found some time, slipped to the Jiayu Spring and looked to the distance where the saha tree grew. Between the green shiny leaves was the legendary deep red fruit which had been compared to the lip color of the Buddha from the far west. She stood from afar and fixed her gaze on it for a long time. If that tiny fruit could really bring back the flesh and bones of the dead, she wanted to try her luck just once to save someone she used to know who had long been deceased. Fengju absolutely could not offend the powerful teacher who could help her attain that saha fruit. When he punished her to copy scriptures, she couldn't throw them into a corner anymore. If she had to transcribe, then she shall transcribe. She started to become obedient with her entire body and mind. In addition, she thought of every way which would erase her misdemeanors in the past. Not only did she now have to be obedient, she had to kiss up to him as well. But how would she go about flattering her teacher? Fengju knitted her brow and opened her workbook. Her punishment was to copy the Dairy Psalm 5 times only. But she had transcribed it 10 times. Hadn't she shown her reverence for the teacher this way? Was this not also a kind of flattery? Yet she still felt a little worried. What if she were to add at the bottom, "May Lord Jihan enjoy boundless blessings and a long life"? No, what if the teacher wasn't in the mood to read, and never got to the end? Then wouldn't her effort have been in vain? It was still best to write that loathsome blandishment at the top of the page. She brought up the brush ready to write, but as she watched the snow accumulate outside the window panes, she became puzzled for half a day. Was the old man's name Jihan, or Hanji? At that time, Yan Chaiwu with half of his body covered in snow hastily stepped in. Because they were thought to be the royal siblings of the Owl clan, they were arranged to stay in the same compound. The residence's name, too, carried a sense of the Bianiao's character. It was called Jai Feng Yuan, House of Gale, and was located right next to the lecture hall. Yan Chaiwu seemed to have forgotten Princess Jihan and had turned to the lady in white whom they had met in the grand hall instead. Every day when school was let out, he'd stop by her place for a chat and thus had little time left to bother Fengju. Half a year went by thusly in amicable peace at the large estate. Fengju raised her head toward Yan Chaiwu, who was now adjusting his robe, and asked, "Do you know what our Fuse's, teacher, name is?" Utterly surprised, Xiao Yan replied, "Isn't Fuse called Fuse?" Then he stepped closer and excitedly asked, "The old geezer has another name." End of chapter 7.